Hello, thank you for joining us. Looks like everyone's still connecting here. See a lot of you still connecting. Okay, well, we're going to start off with welcome from the City Engineering Director, Keith Cook.
Hello and welcome everybody. I guess is this our first meeting for this group via Zoom? I think it is. We've had such pleasant meetings in person. I guess this will be our first one virtual. I want to thank everybody for taking their time this evening to connect with us. Our objective is to give you an update on our work on the Neptune Drive FEMA flood prevention work that we're working on, and try to at least get our story out there of where we're at and how we're going to move forward. We're very fortunate to have with us today our council member Pete Blvd, and I'm sure he would love to say hi. You want to come on there, Pete?
Hi, welcome everyone. Appreciate your patience as we work through this. I don't have much of an update other than to tell you Barbara Lee's staff has changed a little bit in Washington. I know we haven't had to reach out to her yet. I did make contact with Wilma Chan's chief of staff about this issue, so we have some county support if we need it, but it sounds like what you're going to hear tonight, we may not need to really press that too hard. So I just want to welcome everyone, say that I appreciate your patience. We are working through this. This is my #1 priority in District 6 for the city for the next year and a half. Thank you.
Great. I think next we have one of our team members from CivicMic, who is Danielle, who's going to get us going here and take it from here.
Yes, all right. Thank you, Keith. It's so good to see all of you on Zoom, definitely different than the meetings we've had in the past with this group. I do see some familiar faces that I've seen. I guess it's been a while now, maybe over a year since we last met. But as Keith mentioned, this meeting is in regards to the Neptune Drive Shoreline Flood Protection Project. And we started these conversations with all of you after FEMA made an update to the local flood zones following their coastal study back in December of 2018. The map that I have on the screen here shows all of the homes that are within this project. So if this is your first time in a meeting with us, or if you heard about this meeting from a neighbor, something like that, if your home is not in the area that's in red here, this project is not in regards to you. So it's only the homes highlighted there in red. And I can show you where you can find a little bit better detail of that to look at a map in a little more detail. So many of you are signed up already on CivicMic.com. If you go to CivicMic.com/San Leandro, you will come to the homepage here, and this is where all of the information for this project is located. As you can see, the information for the meeting. Up just a little there, Biana, is where you can sign up to receive updates from our site. So if you haven't done that and you didn't receive an email from us saying this meeting's coming up, here's the login information, please visit the website, add your information here. Anytime that we update anything on this web page for this project, you'll get an email sent out to you. Scrolling down just a little bit more is the community participation map. There you can drill down and see if your parcel is actually a parcel within this project area. And if not, then while I thank you for joining us tonight, you most likely don't want to stay on the call. But there's a lot of good information in here. Scrolling down just a little bit further, you can see there's a data center, and then there is latest news. And if you have questions, you can email us directly. So all the information that's on this site as of right now is from our previous conversations. So if you want to go here and get caught up, if you didn't participate in previous meetings, you can get caught up to speed on what we were looking at previously. And then tonight's meeting is kind of to talk about what other options the city has been looking into to move this project forward. So we will be sending out a postcard. And for those of you that are already signed up, you'll get an email for a survey after this meeting, within a couple weeks of this meeting, to ask you for your feedback about the items that were presented tonight. Before I get started, I have a couple items to go over. We're going to try and keep this meeting to about an hour and a half, just to respect everyone's time. And we want to make sure that we hear from as many of you as possible, but we know that after an hour and a half, people start dropping off. So if for some reason you need to drop off, we will be sharing this information on CivicMic.com, and you can go there and you can watch the entire meeting. It will be posted there probably within a day or two of this meeting. So by the end of the week. We will be holding all questions till the end of the presentations. So if you have questions, write them down so you don't forget them, but we will ask you to hold them to the end just in case something gets answered with one of the other presentations. So in order to hear everyone tonight, because we are on an open forum, we ask you to stay muted. If we see some of you coming off mute and the background noise is kind of picking up, we will mute you again. So that's why, if you wonder why you keep getting muted, it's we're doing that intentionally to make sure that everyone can be heard. We also, when we get to the question portion, we really aim to gather feedback and hear questions from various demographics and individuals with diverse values. So we'd like to hear from everyone. We will make sure that there are no personal attacks or slander for people having different viewpoints. If for some reason there are personal attacks, we will remove that person to a private meeting room, and you'll stay there for a little while. We'll allow you to return. If for some reason when you return that behavior continues, then we'll remove you from the meeting and you won't be allowed back in. Now, we've met with this group multiple times, and I don't think that that will happen, but I just want to share that with you in case it does and you're wondering why. So on the screen here is my contact information for, on the next slide there, Biana, my contact information. If you have any questions after this meeting, you can go to civicmic.com/San Leandro. You can visit the San Leandro social media pages for this project, or you can call 1-800-676-7516 for those that are on the phone, or email me at dwood@civicmic.com. Any questions, if you have something that comes up after the meeting, or we run out of time, please email me, because if you have questions, chances are others do as well, and we will get those questions and answers posted out to civicmic.com so everyone can see the responses. So with that being said, we will move on to our first presentation, which is John O'Driscoll from the city.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's been about a year and a half since our last meeting, so I'll begin with a recap. Next slide, please. So these are the impacted properties as described earlier, the ones in red, and there are 2 projects required to be completed to remove those properties out of the high flood risk area. Both properties need to be completed. The projects denoted X and Y. X is the Neptune Drive project, that's the city project, and Y is the Estudillo Canal project, which is the Alameda County Flood Control District's project. And again, they both need to be completed and certified by FEMA to have the flood risk removed. Next slide, please. So this is the current project cost for the Neptune Drive Shoreline Protection Project only. The cost has increased since last time, since 18 months ago. The majority of that cost increase is there are storm drain lines that go beneath the flood wall, and in response to comments from the Bay Conservation Development Commission and also Alameda County Flood Control District, we've had to do some additional work to better protect those pipes under the flood wall, and also to redesign the flood wall footing to accommodate that. So that's the bulk of the cost increase. Also additional design and administration costs. Next slide, please. So this is the Neptune Drive project. It consists of an earthen levee on the northern end and a concrete flood wall on the southern end, and most of this is located on private property. Let's see. Yeah, so this levee will not address sea level rise. This is the total length of this levee is about 300 feet, and the length of the San Leandro shoreline is about 3.5 miles. So this project alone wouldn't help with sea level rise. The water would flood around the north and south ends, and it would not provide a direct benefit to the properties in the high risk area. It would cover a greater area, and also beyond San Leandro, eventually you reach Oakland to the north and Hayward to the south. So sea level rise is a real issue. This sea level rise is a different project, it's a different scope, and would involve all of the communities with bayfront shoreline. Next slide, please. So the project may have appeared to have paused since last time we met, but actually what happened was that the county went out and bid their project in the spring of 2020. The bids received were higher than expected and exceeded the funding that the county had available. So they were forced to reject the bids and go looking for additional funds to fund the project. Two grant opportunities emerged, and currently there are 2 grant applications in the works. The second grant application is a joint effort with the county and the city, and includes the construction of the Neptune Drive Shoreline Protection Project. Now, the city did apply for a grant previously 4 or 5 years ago, but they were denied that time around. So this time, with the combined effort of the 2 agencies working together with a defined project to eliminate the flood risk of a certain area, it's thought that this application is better planned, better thought out, and therefore should have a better chance of success of being awarded grant fund. Next slide, please. So if the grant is successful, the grant will award 75% of eligible costs to the Neptune Drive project. And what that means is the grant will provide $1.37 million. Now, the remaining cost, approximately $1.1 million, will need to be provided locally, possibly through an assessment district. But the grant would fund, close to 60% of the cost of the project. If the grant is not successful, then the county still needs to find additional funds to complete the project. Now, one option to keep that project moving forward is to establish an assessment district to fund the county's shortfall. Next slide, please. So their shortfall is about 2.7 million. So this is the estimated cost of the Neptune Drive project plus the $2.7 million county shortfall combined if the grant was not successful. Next slide, please. So then this is the project timeline, and this is based on the grant being successful. If the grant is not successful, then this timeline would need to change a little bit. So the grants are now being reviewed by California State, and then they will go to FEMA, and we expect results from the grants later this year, November, December timeline. If the grants are awarded, then there's a period of administration when they would prepare their agreements and other documents, execute the grant documents, get all the signatures. That process would take through April or May into 2022. At that point, the county could then bid their project. And the county projects needs 2 consecutive summers for construction. So they wouldn't be able to start construction in 2022. They would actually start construction in 2023. This graph shows them starting actually at the very end of 2022. And what they can do is they can start ordering materials. So they can actually start the construction phase, but without breaking ground until they get into the dry months of May through October, when they can do the physical work. So, and their project will take 2 years, 2 consecutive summers to complete. The city's Neptune Drive project can be done in 1 season. And this graph here shows it being completed in the first of the county's construction years in 2023. But it also could easily be deferred to 2024. So then also going back to the end of 2021, while the grants are still being considered and we're waiting for announcement, preliminary work on the assessment district can start, and then once the grants once the outcome of the grants is known. Then we would know whether we're moving forward with grant funding or without grant funding and adjust accordingly. So that's the timeline. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Well, next we have on our team, Sarah Mayers, who will talk about the project funding. So take it away, Sarah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good. I'm seeing some familiar faces from the meeting that we had out at the golf course. Hard to believe that was almost 2 years ago now. So it feels like the whole world has changed, but I'm glad to be back here with you. I will be talking about the assessment district a little more specifically, and we'll take a look at the cost estimate and provide some additional background information as well. I know that's information I shared when we were together a while back, but just in case we have new folks on the phone and perhaps even folks who have purchased in this area since that time that weren't a part of that presentation, I just want to give some of that background context again. So apologies if that's repetitive for you. I'll try to speed through some of it, but just want to make sure everyone has that background information. Next slide, please. We have a couple of pieces that we'll touch on here in terms of the legislative context. And the purpose for that is just to make sure that you understand the rules under which the assessment district operates. So we'll take a look at Proposition 218, which was approved by voters in 1996. And we'll look at the 1913 Act Assessment District Law briefly, which, believe it or not, became part of California law in 1913, so more than 100 years ago. Next slide. The Proposition 218, as I mentioned, was approved by voters in 1996. That created very strict rules on benefit assessments and requires that an engineer's report be prepared should the city wish to create an assessment district. It establishes rules on special benefit and requires that only special benefits that are conferred by the improvements to property are to be assessed to property owners, and then any benefits that are general in nature to the community at large would not be assessed to property owners, but funds for that general benefit component would come from other sources, not assessments levied to property owners. It also requires that government-owned property is not exempted from the assessment unless it can be shown that the government-owned property does not benefit from the improvements. So we do have some government-owned property within the boundary of the district, and they are being assessed accordingly, according to the benefit confirmed. Next slide, please. The 1913 Act assessment is the law under which we are operating as it relates to the formation of the assessment district. As I mentioned, it was became part of California law in 1913, so a very long history of use in California. They have been used for that entire time to pay for improvements to property. And they're used all up and down the state. Many agencies have this type of assessment district, and they're used for any number of types of improvements. They can really pay for any type of construction type projects. It is required that we prepare that engineer's report that I mentioned, and that we identify the special benefit, we identify the general benefit, and we separate the two things. This type of district is approved by a process that is called a protest ballot proceeding. And what that means is that property owners within the boundary of the assessment district will eventually, in the approval process, be sent a notice and assessment ballot. That assessment ballot is the property owner's opportunity to cast their ballot either in favor of or in opposition to the assessment. Those ballots are then returned to the city where the public hearing is held. You have the opportunity to return your ballot up until the time that that public hearing is closed. At that time, the ballots are tabulated. When the ballots are tabulated, each assessor parcel within the boundary of the district and each property owner that owns those assessor parcels will have cast their ballot, and they're counted by the weight of the assessment to the property. So if my parcel is perhaps larger and I have a higher assessment dollar amount that I would be required to pay, my ballot counts for more than, say, Keith's ballot, who perhaps owns a smaller property in the district with a lower assessment amount. So one way to think about that is kind of $1, one vote. The ballots are weighted in accordance with the assessment amount that is assigned to each parcel in the district. And again, that's property owners casting those ballots, not voters. Next slide. So I mentioned that engineer's report and the requirement around the general benefit and special benefit. These are the factors that we have looked at in order to calculate the assessment that is assigned to each individual parcel. We're looking at the parcel land use type, the lot size, and the building size. I mentioned those publicly owned parcels. All benefiting property is being assessed, including publicly owned property. And I mentioned the general benefit and the fact that we need to separate that out and not assess those costs to property owners. The general benefit that accrues to peripheral parcels, that basically parcels in the surrounding the assessment district boundary, is determined to be 9.5%. So when you look at the total cost estimate, you'll see that we actually then take a reduction of 9.5% of those total costs, because those funds have to come from another source, not the assessments charged to property owners. Next slide. We're looking at assigning what we call benefit points to each individual parcel in the district. And we're looking at the various benefits, those special benefits that accrue to properties within the district. And so the special benefits that we have identified are removal of the flood zone designation and reduced risk of flooding and flood damage. And so we're looking at assigning points related to those two special benefits. And then we're looking at a lot factor, which evaluates the land size, the acreage or square footage of the land for each assessor parcel. And then we're looking at a building factor, which evaluates the square footage of the building that sits on the parcel, if any. So once we look at all of those factors, we're able to calculate the total benefit points assigned to each parcel in the district. Next slide. This is the cost estimate. It does look a little different from perhaps a couple of the cost estimates you may have seen in the past, certainly a little different than what you saw in 2018. If you were at that meeting, costs have increased a little bit since that time. So this is the most up-to-date information we have. You can see that the construction cost is estimated at $2,477,000. And I will take a moment to read some of these numbers just in case we have folks on the phone that aren't also seeing the screen here. The general benefit contribution of 9.5% is deducted. That's $235,390. And then because this is a situation where money needs to be borrowed to fund the improvements and the construction costs, we are looking at some debt issuance costs related to the actual debt that would be incurred. That's $460,000. That leaves us with a total balance to be assessed of $2,702,392. When you add up all of the benefit points that I just talked about that are assigned to each individual assessor parcel within the boundary of the assessment district, we have 3,981.15 benefit points. And that leaves us with an assessment rate per benefit point of $679. Next slide. We also have a budget that contemplates the additional work in the Estudillo Canal. So I'll go through these numbers again. So should this situation play out to where this additional funding is needed, there is an additional amount. The budget you can see is the same as it was for the Neptune project only, but it includes that shortfall amount of $2,700,000. And that puts the balance to be assessed at $5,595,892. Divide that by the same 3,981.15 benefit points, and that leaves us with an assessment per benefit point of $1,406. Next slide. And I know that it's hard to figure out, when we're talking in terms of benefit points, what that might mean for you. So we are getting there so we can see what the rates on a per parcel basis are. But the assessment calculation is based on your individual benefit points that are assigned to your parcel based on all those factors that I mentioned, the lot size, the building size, and the special benefits received, times that assessment rate per benefit point. Next slide. And so on this slide, we have the approximate assessments. And this is for the Neptune work only. For a detached single family residential property, the range of assessment amounts is $1,600 to $7,200, depending on, and that's the total assessment, depending on the various benefit points assigned. The typical assessment is $1,700. What that means in terms of an annual amount that you might pay on your property tax bill, it's between $210 and $960. The typical annual assessment for detached single family residential is $230. When we're looking at the attached single family residential, the range of the total assessment is $900 to $2,500, with the typical assessment being $1,600. On an annual basis, that equates to an annual amount of $120 to $340, with the typical annual assessment being $210. And then just for comparison purposes, we've included the golf course parcel as well. That total assessment is $286,000 and the annual assessment is $37,200. So I want to pause here for just a moment. I think I'm seeing people write some numbers down and take a look at that. So I'll just pause here and we'll leave this slide up for just a moment and wait. And we have a similar slide that shows the same information that includes both the Neptune work and the Estudillo Canal. But I'm just kind of watching and seeing. I don't want to take this away before folks are done looking at it. And just a reminder, this will be available on the CivicMic website after the presentation as well, if you need to refer back to it.
Right, thank you, Sarah. Yes, the whole recorded meeting as well as the slides individually.
All right, go ahead to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, this is the slide that refers to both the Neptune project plus the Estudillo Canal. So when we're looking at single family, detached single family residential under that scenario, which includes that shortfall funding, the assessments range between $3,200 and $15,000, with the typical assessment being $3,500. That equates to an annual assessment of between $430 and $1,920, with the typical annual assessment being $460. On the attached single family residential, the assessment range is $1,800 to $5,200, with the typical assessment being $3,200. That equates to an annual assessment of between $240 and $680, with the typical annual assessment being $430. And the golf course property under this scenario would have an assessment of $592,200, with an annual assessment of $75,340. So we'll pause and leave that one here for a moment, just in case folks are writing down numbers again. So you can see the numbers have changed slightly since we had our initial presentation. If you remember what we presented at that time, again, some of that is related to some changes to the construction costs, and then we're of course giving you that second scenario that would include that work on the Estudillo Canal side of the project as well, for comparison purposes. Next slide, please. Well, with that, I think we are about ready for questions.
Thank you, Sarah. So yes, at this point, we will move into questions. We will go ahead and have anyone who has a question, you can go ahead and unmute and just say your name. I'll call the name that I hear. If you're on the phone, you will hit *6 to unmute. We ask that you express your views rather than speaking for others. Try and listen carefully to the questions that are asked and stay open-minded. As we discussed, no personal attacks, and try and use this opportunity to ask questions from the city and about the project and avoid grandstanding with any topics that you want to share with the community. So with that, go ahead and just say your last name if you have a question.
I'm Yvette Rice. And
Yvette, go ahead.
I have a question. We own a property on Neptune Drive. It is 2 separate houses. However, the lot is deeded as a duplex. So is that a single family? Is that attached or detached? And then another question I have is, I'm the 3rd lot from Marina Boulevard. How does the FEMA decide that the water's only going to come to my house and not the house next to me on the other side?
So I think the first part of that question, Sarah can answer.
Yeah, hi, Yvette. I would have to look up your particular property and see how that's being treated to know for sure. So perhaps my email is up on the screen. If you perhaps have your property tax bill that has your assessor parcel on it, if you want to email me the assessor parcel number, I would be happy to look up all of that information and respond to you via email with all of the specifics about your particular parcel.
Thank you. A third question I have is, we own a condo on Blvd. So is that attached or detached? Because a condo is, one big building, even though we only own one little piece of it, it is one big building. So is that attached or detached?
The condos are definitely considered attached, single family residential.
Hi, Deborah Kirschenbaum here. I just want to say that my husband and I recently refinanced our commercial property on Doolittle. And the assessments that the city is asking for are far, far, far less than the cost of flood insurance. Once your lenders wake up to the fact that we're now in a FEMA flood zone, you need to realize the relative costs. So this is a very good deal for property owners here. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment, Deborah. Other questions?
Yeah, this is Bud.
Hi, Bud.
The question I have is, I'm on the board of directors of a condominium complex, and we need to prepare a budget every year in June and July to be submitted, approved at our annual meeting in September. We have no way of budgeting what FEMA may or may do with the cost factor, and we don't find out until basically December the amount that's going to be due. It makes it extremely difficult to try and keep our residents aware of what their dues for the next year are going to be. And it's just totally frustrating to think that something that potentially could have been done in 2022 is now 2023, potentially 2024, and would like to, there's probably no way of knowing how much time FEMA would take beyond 2024 to give us final approval. It's not fair to our residents. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bud. Jim, did you have a question, Jim Perola?
Yeah, my wife and I are sitting here. I have a couple, actually. The first one would be when you take a vote on the assessment, and if somebody does not turn in their vote, does that count as a yes vote for the assessment?
When the ballots are returned, we count up the assessment amount related to all of the ballots that are cast in favor and all of the ballots that are cast in opposition, only of the ballots returned. And then we compare those two things to each other. If the total dollar amount of the ballots returned in favor is greater than the total dollar amount of the ballots returned in opposition, then we do not have a majority protest and we proceed. If the ballots returned, total amount of the assessment related to the ballots returned in opposition is greater than the total amount of ballots returned in favor, we do have a majority protest and we do not proceed.
Okay, just to clarify, what of the ballots that aren't returned, what do they count as?
Well, we don't count them. They're not counted as part of the proceeding. It's only ballots returned that are counted.
Okay, and then the second question there are a significant number of seniors, according to, I was looking at your population trends and key indicators, out of the 3,000 plus population and over 1,000 households, there's 31.9% that are 57 years or above. A lot of those people do not pay for flood insurance because they've already paid off their mortgages and they can't afford it, because if you look at your income levels, there's 28.4% that are below 49,000 and 18.1% that are below 34,000. And those people are going to be hurting. My wife and I can afford it. We're voting for the assessment, even though we don't have flood insurance. We paid off our mortgage, so we don't have to worry about it. But just to be fair to other people, we're going to vote for it. Having said that, I do feel that the city needs to work more on the county and the federal government to use those one-time stimulus funds for infrastructure. We just spent in our city over millions of dollars. We're going to be spending on Fairleigh Pool. This marina is used by more households than Fairleigh Pool, I'll guarantee that. So this is infrastructure. The people down here I know believe, yes, we'll vote for the assessment, but the city should be paying for it. And because everybody uses the marina, including county and including people from out of town. I guess the question there is, what are we going to do for those people that can't afford it? And how do we take care of those? Because if you're making very little money on a fixed income, what a lot of our residents down here are, they're not going to be able to afford it. I don't care if you spread it out over how many years, they're not going to be able to afford it. What do we do for those people?
I don't know that we have an answer for that question. Keith, you want to take that?
You took the answer. We don't have a final solution for that. That would come up with working with the city council, and so it would be part of that process with the city council. Maybe Councilmember Blue would like to chime in.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, Jim, thanks for your info on that, your question on that. I think I've shared this before with people. I had conversations with Chris Zapata about 5 years ago. That was 2 city managers ago. Conversation with Jeff Kay 3 years ago. That was 1 city manager ago. And the absolute first thing I talked to Fran Robustelli, our current city manager, about when she was the interim, was the importance of this and looking for some creative funding streams and funding mechanisms for those who either can't afford it, or to see if there's something the city can do to take a little bit of the onus or a lot of the onus off. We don't have a plan for people that flat out can't afford it, but I did talk to her about an idea for allowing the city to be the financier, not going to an outside lender, to save some percentage points and then be flexible. We had to run that by legal, and the preliminary is that our city attorney believes that the way we would do it would pass legal muster. At least when I talked to him, it was about a year ago. So it is frustrating. I also want to address the patient people of you on the call to let you know. So one of my colleagues came on the council and in 2 months got a park approved and it's going to get funded this Monday night, $600,000. And I said to our engineer and others, and it was the least nice I've ever been. I think Keith will tell you that it's the least nice I've ever been to any staffer, that there's going to be hell to pay if a park gets built before this FEMA flood project gets completed, but that the people on the west side of town are just very quiet and not politically active. So I want to invite you all to be the squeaky wheels. Write your council members. We already got a letter signed by 4 HOA presidents. I haven't seen that since I've been in office. And in fact, the last 10 years, I've never seen a letter signed by 4 HOA presidents. So I think the time now is to turn up the heat on the politicals, turn up the heat on the county politicals, And let's make this more of a priority so we can get it done. We'll find the way to get the funding if we have to. If we get that grant, it's going to be great. You can put heat on the politicals for the AR funding, the relief funding that Jim Prola just talked about. See if we can get some infrastructure money. The problem is everybody's been playing nicely on our side of town. Nobody's raising hell on our side of town. And the noisy 10 are going to get more than the quiet 1,000. And I think it's becoming an equity issue, like Jim said, because not only senior population, but our Asian American Pacific Islander population seems to be high in this part of town. So do what you have to do to mobilize and put some pressure on some of my colleagues, and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you, Pete. Any other questions? Let's see here. What do we have? Okay, Timothy?
Yes. I just didn't understand something that John said about this not being an issue with sea level rise. I thought that was at the core of it. Could he just elaborate a little on that?
Yeah, certainly. So sea level rise is a real issue, but this project is specific to removing the target properties out of the current high risk flood area. And the way it's set up, it's that flood area receives the direct benefit from this 300 long foot levee flood wall structure. The levee flood wall structure would not even if it was built higher, would not stop flood sea level rise. The sea level would flow around the north and south sides of it and affect not just those properties that were highlighted, but many other properties too. So sea level rise is a real issue, but it's a much bigger project. I mean, even if the city built a levee along the whole shoreline of San Leandro, 3.5 miles, then you still meet the border with Oakland at the north and Hayward at the south. Those communities need to do something similar until the complete bay has a ring of protection around it. So yeah, the sea level rise it's a big deal, but it's a different project, different scope. It's going to take a lot more effort and a lot more funding to address.
We have with us Hank Ackerman from the Alameda County Flood Control District. Hank, is there anything else you want to add to that in terms of the difference between sea level rise and the removal from the flood designation?
Yeah, this project is to protect against the 100-year tides. It's simply a tidal issue. With sea level rise, it's a very complex situation. Like John was saying, you've got neighbors to the north and the south, and so water can come around, that kind of thing. The eventual, I mean, everybody's looking at sea level rise, so there will be a project, probably in another decade or two that would probably address sea level rise on a regional basis. But the target keeps moving. It's they still don't know precisely what sea level rise people should be building for. And I think we haven't gotten to that point whether we're going to pass that tipping point where you have all of Iceland, Greenland, all the ice caps and everything melted, that sort of thing. So there's still a lot of studying going on around the Bay and around the world relative to sea level rise, and no one is forgetting about that. But right now, this project is to deal with the current 100-year tide.
Thank you, Hank.
Thank you.
I have a question.
One thing I did want to, I want to pitch in about the discussion about assessments. The flood control district would not need any assessment revenue to make up for our shortfall. We've got, if push comes to shove, we will push out some other projects. This is one of two very top priority projects we have. So we will fund it regardless of whether we have a shortfall. We'll figure that out by moving other projects.
That's great news, Hank, and we will definitely work with that.
Hi, this is Yvette Rice again. I have another question. Is this a one-time assessment or is this going to be like every year? And the other thing is, I've lived on the middle of Williams, just half a block up from Neptune. And only once when I was a young girl did the water come over Neptune. And once over 34 years ago, it actually came onto Neptune. So in all those years of my 69 years of living, it's only happened 2 times. What is the likelihood that this is going to hit us again in 20 or 30 years? It hasn't happened in 34 years.
Well, that's a great question, and it really speaks to the project that we have. You're right, it is the 1 in 100 year storm, but you just told us about 2 opportunities or 2 instances within 100 years. So you can tell that it can be a real thing, and maybe it wasn't completely a 100-year storm. Maybe it was a 50-year storm, and it was a smaller area. But it doesn't say that the 100-year storm is not upon us. So it's a risk. Obviously, it's a risk model, and just like we live with earthquakes. We have to live with, the risk of flooding. But if we can minimize that, which is a lot easier, than probably for earthquakes, we try to, and that's what this project is all about.
Keith, just to add to that, this designation was created by FEMA, not the city. So they're the ones with their coastal study that determined these new flood zones. And then I think did you want Sarah to answer the second part of the first part of your question, maybe?
Well, how many times are we going to have to pay this? Like, yes. Is it every year or once a time or whatever? But the other thing is, wasn't that last man on, wasn't he from FEMA? Or do we have a person on here that is in FEMA? Because my question also is, how does this map get made? It makes no sense to me that the water is going to come only to the first 3 lots from Marina onto Neptune Drive, but the rest of those houses down my block aren't going to get affected. The water's just going to come to my house and ignore the rest of the block. So how does FEMA decide? I could see where the canal is. Okay, that makes sense because that whole Blvd there is by the canal. But when you look at the houses on Neptune, that just does not seem logical to me that only like if my house was 1 more lot over, I wouldn't be affected by, right. by FEMA's map. So that's what I'm wondering, who in FEMA makes this? This does not make any sense to me, how they're Isn't, if the water's coming, isn't it going to hit all of us on Neptune?
So we do not have a representative from FEMA on the call tonight. Hank, I think is who you're referring to, is from the county engineering department. But there is a report that you can review to see how they came up with this determination. Keith, do you have any more on that?
Well, I would say, yeah, it's really a function of the elevation at your house, and you may not be able to discern it, but as you move along the street, your house may be at the other houses may be at a higher elevation, and so that's how that line is drawn. It's drawn based on the elevation of the ground in your area. So
You bet. We do have at the second meeting that we gave, community meeting, which is on civicmic.com/San Leandro, we did have a FEMA representative there and he did a presentation. So you can go and watch that video and see the presentation that he provided as to how this new study was, these new flood zone designations were created. So that may be useful for you. And then Sarah, do you want to answer her question about the assessment timing? Just so we don't miss that.
Thank you.
There were two numbers that I was providing related to the assessment, and the way that these 1913 Act assessments work is that there is a total assessment amount that is allocated to your property, which is basically your share of the construction and financing costs. That is the total amount of principal value or cost value of the assessment. Then I provided an annual assessment rate, and that rate is basically the amount of principal, interest, and administrative costs that you would pay on an annual basis over a 10-year period to pay off the debt associated with that total assessment amount. So again, you have a total assessment amount, that's the amount that will show up on your ballot. But the annual payment would be the principal and interest on the debt to repay that total assessment amount plus the annual administrative costs. So I don't know, Bianna, can you pull up my presentation again and maybe go back to those slides? But you can see again, there's an annual amount and that total assessment. But it is a 10-year repayment that we're looking at. So this would be an item that showed up on your property tax bill for 10 years.
Sarah, it's Pete Ballou, the councilman. I also believe that we had talked, and I don't know if it's changed when Pablo was kind of running this, we had talked about people could pay it off one time up front and get maybe a discount, or pay it off over a certain number of years and then have to pay a little bit of interest on it.
Yep, absolutely. So if you choose not to go with the annual assessment amount and basically finance the obligation, then you will, through part of the formation proceedings, you would receive a letter in the mail, which will give you your assessment amount per parcel for your individual parcel, and you would have the opportunity to pay that off in full at that time. It's called the cash collection period. And so there would be a window of time in which you can choose to pay that full dollar amount rather than finance the obligation over the 10-year period. You can also, if you decided not to pay off right then at that cash collection period, you would also have the opportunity to pay it off in year 3 or 5 or whenever. There are times throughout the life of that obligation that you would have the opportunity to prepay the assessment, whether that's something that is required if you were going through an escrow transaction, or you win the lottery and just decide you want to pay it off, whatever the case may be, you would have the opportunity to request a prepayment calculation at that time, and you would save on the remaining interest that you would have otherwise paid.
Danielle?
Yes.
Member Ballou here. Two things. One, I see that we've been, I didn't know if he was here before, but I see we've been joined by Austin Asakwe, who's also one of our great people in our engineering department, does a lot of work for the city. Great work. And then Keith may be able to answer. There was still one question I think that we didn't fully answer. Someone asked basically the FEMA map redrawing approval process and the timing on it, because I know there is a legislated amount of time they have to consider and get back, but I don't know if that question was ever answered by whoever asked it.
I'm going to have John or Nick answer that particular question.
The FEMA maps are now certified. There was a period, a review period, but I believe that by now, I think the maps were first published in 2018, and then they were certified in 2019.
Yes, thank you. But I believe there's a process that if we, so after the work is complete and we submit that we've completed the work, the county side and the city side, there's a legislated number of days, I don't remember what it is, but it was talked about at the last meeting that FEMA has to look at them and get back to us. I think it's 90 days they have to.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. So after the construction is complete, and then all required documentation from construction, any tech reports, any certifications from engineers, any other required documents, once those are all packaged and forwarded to FEMA, they have a 90-day period to review and complete the process. Now, within that 90 days, if there's something missing, they can ask for the missing document, and that would restart their 90-day clock. So that's why on the schedule we showed several months. Hopefully, it's much shorter. But to be realistic, we put a few months on there, and once everything is certified, they will issue a revision letter to the map, and that's when the high risk flood will be taken away.
Yeah, this is Bud again.
1 minute, Bud. I just want to say that in the chat we posted a link to the FEMA presentation, as well as the state has a property tax postponement program for seniors, and that link is there as well. So both of those are in the chat if you want to find out more information about that. So thank you, Bud. Go ahead.
My only question is, let's say that the approval in the 90 days is there and it's the middle of the year. Are we going to be rebated as a homeowners association for the thousands of dollars that we've had to pay for a year in advance?
I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that question. Keith or John?
No, I don't know. I'm sure that's an insurance question. I would talk to your insurance agent. Unfortunately, we're not part of that process.
I mean, FEMA has the money. I represent 264 units with 550 people. We have to make a huge investment every year. If we're removed, why would we not get some of that money rebated back to us from the federal government, from FEMA?
Oh, you're getting your insurance through FEMA?
Correct.
Yeah,
you're required.
That's a good question. I definitely need to put that to FEMA.
Okay, I would certainly like to know, even it's now stretching out another couple of years from when we originally thought it would be. But yes, I think that's important. We're required to prepay, and if we no longer need the insurance, we should be rebated for whatever balance of the year remains.
But we will get that question over to a FEMA representative and see what we can find out, and then post that response on CivicMic so everyone can see that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, this is Grace.
For the scope of what Bud is talking about, his homeowners association, I was wrong, Keith, it's not $300,000. His homeowners association paid FEMA $217,000 for a year of insurance. So his point is that it is a huge expense aggregate. And I know we don't have to worry about it. We have no control over that. It's FEMA, but I can also work with Barbara Lee's office to see if we need to do some sort of legislation or some sort of pressure, but that's probably a conversation for another day. At first thing, we got to get this thing moving. And then we can strategize on that. And please reach out to me. I may be able to help figure something out with that.
Yeah, this is Ed Cable. Just have a comment to follow up on what Bud and Pete said. I purchased my property in 2018 and, was blissfully unaware that this was occurring until, I got an assessment for a high risk flood. And I'm like, what happened? My house didn't move. And so as a homeowner and looking at the potential assessment versus what I'm paying in flood insurance, to me, it makes more sense to just get this thing done and get rid of the flood insurance from a financial standpoint. So speed is highly encouraged.
Yes, we agree. Timothy, Did you have another
yes,
question?
I do. Regarding the assessment, when you boil it down to dollars, do you have an estimate of how much of the total population of dollars belongs to city properties?
Sarah, can you answer that question?
Yeah, give me just a moment and I will be able to answer that question for you. So of course there is the golf course property. I showed those assessments to you just a little earlier. But I will look that up. How about that? I will, if there's, maybe let's move on to another question and I will look that up and come back to you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Carol?
Thank you. I'm curious, if I'm going to be selling, I'm going to be retiring and moving out of the area. If I'm going to be selling in a couple of years and the assessment happens, do I have to pay that off in my escrow or does the next person pick it up and finish the payment?
The next person, well, if the buyer would like to request that the assessment be paid off as a condition of escrow, they could do that. But it is not an assessment that has to be paid off. So there is an opportunity for that to just remain on the property. And the new owner would then pay the annual property tax bill to repay that obligation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And circling back on the total assessments, the city-owned property is a total of 13.9% of the total assessment amount in the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim, did you have another question?
Yeah, this is actually for Peter, for somebody from the city. When you've contacted Barbara Lee's office about the money that's going to come to cities for infrastructure, what have they said?
No, I didn't contact Barbara Lee's office about that. I said her staff had changed. We hadn't reached out to her because originally this was held up, we were told, because of the Army Corps of Engineers. So we were prepared to go to Barbara Lee and say, can you light a fire under these people? But it didn't need to happen because all of a sudden we started getting calls back from the flood control people. And it turned out it wasn't that at all. It was the bid structure, et cetera, and dealing with BCDC and the timing. They can only replace those floodgates like 3 months out of the year because of environmental concerns or whatever. However, there is infrastructure money. I believe that some may have been talked about from the city staff when they talked about the, what do they call that, with one-time money that the feds can give. Anyway, we were not considered for that on the FEMA flood Neptune Drive project. However, there's 19 million, as you know, coming from the Recovery Act. And I did have a conversation with our city manager. The issue is everything's here right now because we're waiting to see if we get this grant or if we don't, et cetera. So the only reason we were going to contact Barbara Lee is to speed the process along because of the inordinate amount of money that homeowners associations and homeowners were having to pay. It turned out that went away. We didn't have to do that, but we still are prepared if we need to in the future to leverage some support from her. Okay. The bigger issue was the county, and just listening to what Hank had to say now, it sounds like this is one of the top 2 priorities for the county, now we're on year 6, I think, Jim. So I know it's taken a long time. I know you told me about this when I took over from you. And it hasn't been lost on deaf ears. It's amazing. You know what you have to go through to get people to just do what's right. So we're going to hold the Barbara Lee thing in reserve in case we need that. And for funding opportunities, this grant is like the best promising thing we can come up with. And kudos to Keith for that, and probably Hank, because they developed that. That could really help us. So in retrospect, maybe it's a little bit better, but the issue is I heard that someone in Barbara Lee's office, they've changed some staff. So we'll have to reorient if we go to them about what the issue is and what we need.
If you need eventually help when you go to Barbara Lee, I've known her for quite a while. And I'd be willing to be part of a contingent if you put a contingent together.
I think we just need the residents to be squeaky wheels at the city level, and I think things will get moving, and the county level.
Just to reiterate on that topic, there was a chat to me asking about why the city can write a $2 million check to improve the swimming pool. And I think that Pete, your comments on attending council meetings and, letting your voice be heard is the exact answer to that question there. So Pete's recommending that if you would like to talk about this topic, to show up at a council meeting and let other council members hear your concerns.
Or just email. You can just email. Too.
Or email. All right. Any other questions? Remember *6 if you're on the phone. No other questions. Okay. Well, as I mentioned before, we will be sending out a survey within a couple weeks of this meeting. Within a few days, the meeting will be posted to civicmic.com/San Leandro. Keep an eye out for a postcard on the survey, or if you're signed up on the website, you'll get an email with a link directly to the survey there. We'll keep you updated on everything that we find. And, we're really grateful that you guys could join us tonight. And before we go, was there, Bianna, did you have any other questions in chat by chance? Just want to make sure we got everyone's questions.
Well, I have a FYI. Go ahead, Bianna.
One person asked, what is SFR?
Oh.
SFR stands for single family residential.
Thank you, Sarah. And Keith, you want to close this?
Actually, we're actually going to talk about the Estudillo Canal in a little bit more detail as it relates to the county's project here at the bay side, but also all the way through the manor to 880. And Hank Ackerman and his team will kind of give us a flood control education for this facility in our town. And that will probably occur at the June 14th work session. If it doesn't occur there, it'll probably be in July. But right now we're planning for June 14th, a discussion about the Estudillo Canal. And in fact, a whole myriad of items regards to the shoreline development and the marina. So feel free to join us that evening. There'll be a lot of good information. And
Thank you, Keith. We'll share that out on CivicMic as well for people to
yes,
see.
and can Keith, do we have the email list still of the people that came to the meetings, or has that all been migrated to the CivicMic?
It's all on CivicMic.
We need you to show up because there's also some competing interests that are trying to hold up the FEMA Neptune Drive flood district. Keith is being so nice. There's competing interests to hold up what we're trying to do here with this flood assessment district to take on a bigger project that would cost estimated over $100 million with the Estudillo Canal as it runs behind the old Marina, the old Marina High School. So we need people to show up. We need your voices to be heard. They're getting tired of hearing only my voice. So if you can make that June meeting, you'll be noticed. Please come. And it's a work session, so it's more direct and more focused. And they're going to need to hear from the West End residents. And Keith, you're so diplomatic. My hat is off to you.
Is Pete the representative for the Marina area?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yvette.
Okay, with that, anything else to add, Keith, or we're a wrap? All right, thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you spending the evening with us and taking your time to be here and ask questions, and we will be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.